is a trailblazer. He's the founder and CEO of Satlyt. His background includes Tesla, Google, SpaceX, Starlink. His focus, it's a cloud-based infrastructure, and his vision includes Africa as a creator and leader in space and tech, not just a consumer. So, welcome, Rama.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I even wore a suit jacket for you all, so this must be important. My apologies first that I can't be there in person. I am flying to Berlin in a couple of hours for another conference as well. But for those of you who will be at the ISE in Sydney next week, hopefully I'll get to see you. Hi everyone, my name is Rama Afullo. I am a Kenyan-born, US-based entrepreneur focused on networking satellites in space. As was mentioned, my background's in mechanical engineering and space systems engineering, and I've worked across Tesla, Google, and SpaceX over the last decade or so. And space has been a passion a passion of mine for a while, and I'm happy to dive deeper thereof. But honored to be here. Thank you so much to NECA for the invitation, and happy to go into detail.
Thank you so much, Rama. Our first question is, can you share how your journey from Tesla, Google, and SpaceX shaped your vision for Satlyt?
Yeah, so Satlyt, so for those of you who don't know how it's spelled, it's Satlyt. It's a bit of a interesting name, but it's a backronym for Space and Technology Analytics. And the vision really is an amalgamation of my experiences through the last 10 years or so. So at Tesla, some of the work that I did included being the third employee of Tesla in Africa. I was based between Cape Town and Amsterdam. I spent a lot of time working across the energy products division. I was managing the Tesla Powerwall across Africa. It's just a lithium-ion battery for the residential sector, but retrofitted this for the small commercial sector, and particularly the telecom sector. I got to see how the tower companies were starting to buy like radio base stations off of mobile network operators. And that had an impact, I think, in how I thought about sharing and how technology can move forward. Thereafter, after 3 years at Tesla and selling Tesla's first deals in the telecommunications vertical, I moved over to Google, initially in Ireland, and eventually in the US, where I was focused initially on sort of advertising sales. But soon thereafter, when I moved to the US, I was in cloud engineering. So I got back to my engineering roots. And there I was managing clients like Snowflake, Twitter, and GitLab. And Snowflake in particular had an impact on me once again, because they had a very different sort of methodology in terms of how they did business, in that they were looking at other sort of markets and other competitors as frenemies, really, right? Like where they'd work with Google, work with Amazon, work with Microsoft, but really they had a competing product in data warehousing. And then I left that team and moved over to the startups and AI team, still at Google. And there I got exposure to a lot of the VC and startup ecosystem. And while in parallel, I was studying a master's in space systems engineering at Johns Hopkins part-time, and also working part-time across Google's space initiatives, trying to sort of advocate for Google to create a space vertical similar to what Amazon and Microsoft do, right? So I wrote a white paper internally for that. And while doing that, I got my green card. And I said, well, enough of that, right? I've got to go do the real thing. And I'd interviewed at SpaceX before that. And, my thesis was simple. Let me go to SpaceX. Let me see if they're actually willing to horizontally integrate and work on an open ecosystem, because SpaceX notoriously has a very vertically integrated closed ecosystem mentality. So I joined the team. Turned out that no, they were not going to horizontally integrate. They were very much going to continue on their path. And so I had some choices to make for myself. Do I stay in Los Angeles, where I'd moved down to from the Bay Area, and stay at SpaceX and become part of the furniture, or do I actually go out there and build the future that I was hoping they would be building, right? And yeah, so opted to leave after 3, 4 months at SpaceX, and I started this company Satlyt just a year later. Sorry, just a year ago. So literally the next day after my last day at SpaceX.
Wow. 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 Thank you so much for sharing that. And then the next question is, what problem is Satlyt solving, and
Yep.
why does it matter for the future of space?
So I think it's a very fundamental problem. What happens quite often, and most technologists in the room will attest to this, is that everyone starts moving in a specific direction because no one wants to be left behind. I mean, look at the current AI bubble that we're in, right? Folks are investing because no one wants to say that they were. I heard yesterday someone said no one wants to be the dinosaur amidst the robots, right? So folks start to move things forward, and then what you find is that there's gaps that are created that everyone is aware of, but no one knows how to solve, right? And this has happened in the space industry, where because of the advent of folks like SpaceX, everyone's moving towards a vertically integrated ecosystem. Everyone knows that edge computing, interoperability, being able to cross communicate with us other satellites has significant advantages, right? Lots of papers written about it. Every event, every conference you go to about the space ecosystem, where they're talking about the technology itself, they talk about interoperability, they talk about cross communication, they talk about inter-satellite links, right? But very often there isn't a solution for it. Now, what this also does is I heard someone mention spectrum in the last panel. When we see things like SpaceX buying up $17 billion worth of spectrum from EchoStar and other folks like Viasat, et cetera, looking into spectrum, what you need to understand is that the highways in space, the data highways are being bought up and power is being consolidated. So we need a counterweight to that, right? So essentially, what we end up creating here is the Android equivalent to SpaceX's iPhone, right? Where we can cross-link and cross-network with a whole bunch of different satellite operators in space and create a way for them to monetize the excess compute capacity just by adding software directly into the satellite with one line of code. So it has the potential to absolutely change the way folks work across space-to-space communications as well as space-to-ground by using other satellites as relays, by pre-processing data in space, just by finding ways for folks to create managed services in space that they previously didn't think about. And eventually, this will also have significant ramifications for folks here on the ground where you can task satellites at will, right? Simply by tapping into this network.
Amazing. And then what were some trade-offs you faced in balancing innovation, cost, and access?
Uh, I mean, I think we're still early stage enough for
Yeah.
me to not have made any trade-offs,
Okay.
right? Just
Okay.
just went after it.
Okay. Okay, that's great. And then as we go on to, Africa policy and partnerships, what
Yeah.
policy or regulatory gaps must Africa address to grow its space sector?
Well, I mean, policy is one thing, but I think space is now space is a direct folks looking at space tends to be folks who are a little bit more advanced in general, right? Like at least that's the perception of it, right? Is that you don't necessarily have as many other problems, right? And my home country in Kenya, we've got a lot of things that we're addressing, but we actually have like a burgeoning space industry and a really great sort of space agency as well that Satellite has actually partnered with. But I think that speed is super important. I think folks like any space agencies who don't have a plan of putting assets up in space, particularly some satellites that will be sort of long serving and having access to their own data, right? It's super important that they do. I know a lot of African countries are looking at sovereignty in general, like data sovereignty, and the fact that they don't own these assets makes things a little bit more difficult for them. But there are ways that they can look into this. And I mean, I know there's about, I think, 40% of African countries have satellites in orbit. But what we need to start doing is looking at how we can share access to all that data across the African ecosystem. And that means that there needs to be a shift in policy. But that goes beyond that, right? In that the way we look at policy in general includes things like the visa system, right? Like I know more and more African countries are starting to get rid of needing to have entry visas for other African countries, right? And even just travel, right? Traveling sometimes, in order for me to travel from one African country to the next, I need to go through Dubai or Qatar or Doha, right? It makes no sense, right? So I think making those things easier shifts a lot of the mindsets with folks within the continent.
Okay, thank you for that. And then the next question is, how can US-Africa partnerships through government, private sector, or diaspora accelerate this work?
Good question. I think that of course, I'm of the diaspora, right? And one of the first things I did was to partner with the Kenyan Space Agency and to also create a Kenyan subsidiary for our company, right? I think the diaspora always wants to help for the most part, right? Very few African diaspora that I know leave and don't want to extend a hand backwards, right? So I think that's always something to worthwhile tapping into. But in terms sort of the US government and how they can help. Yeah, I think just enabling the highways, right? Enabling folks to be able to have a much easier time hiring outside of the US, right? Like that helps a lot, right? I think ITAR and EAR regulations, I think they're of course there for a reason, right? Arms regulations are there for a reason. But I think things could be easier, right? So deregulating that in some instances would be super useful because there's things, of course, I can't expose to my Kenyan employees, right? With some of the work that we're doing, particularly because of ITA, and some of it, I mean, literally makes no sense.
Okay. And as we look at the future outlook of Africa, what financing or investment models can make African space innovation sustainable?
Well, I think that so if during my time of my 33 years of life, 27 of those 33 years were spent in Africa. I lived in Kenya, Botswana, and South Africa. And during all that time, I think I started, there was a startup that I was starting right out of university. And I remember pitching to VCs and seeing the difference in their approaches in venture capital in Africa and even with a lot of European investors versus the approach in America. I think it makes a big difference. I think we need to believe in our people, right? And in America, if you've got a pretty good idea, there's a pretty high chance that someone out there, some VC, will probably fund you, right? If you push hard enough, right? And if you've got enough of a background for them to believe in you. I think oftentimes in African spaces, and I understand that there's a completely different mindset and a different terrain to go through. When someone has a really good idea, we're going to ask them 100 different questions, and if they answer one of those questions incorrectly, then that's a reason to not invest. But I think we should just take a chance on folks. There is venture capital available. There are funds available. And the other thing is, very often, all right, some of our nations will receive a whole bunch of funding, right? And let's be honest, some of that funding will get pocketed, right? I think there are folks who are, if they invest in their people, will make many times over the returns than they would had they just pocketed the money, right? I think that's the way to think about it. Like long-term investment, right? Is the best way to think about things, right? Invest in your people, and you'll get the returns many times over.
Absolutely. Investing in your people is, very, very essential. And which emerging technologies, AI, small sets, space edge computing, will be most transformative for Africa?
I think climate change will have the worst impact on Africa, right? And what's kind of unfair is if you look at the climate change heat maps, is that the places that are doing the most damage to the climate are the places that are going to be the least affected, right? And the places doing the least damage are going to be the most affected, just like in the long run, right? I know about sort of sea level rising, but like that heat shift is going to be significant. But in terms of the technology that can counteract this, I'll just say, if we had to logically say what will have the most particular impact on the African day-to-day life, right? It's hard to not imagine us being in a pretty bad situation if we were to be left behind in the AI race. Bubble or no bubble, right? That's
Yeah.
going to be a significant problem, right? Like access to our data in space, for sure, like that's a big issue. But I do think that if we're left behind and if some of these let's call them visionaries, right? Who are leading some of these AI companies, get their way, then they will consolidate power in ways that will not benefit Africa. So hopefully we have enough Africans who are out there working on these problems and working to make sure that we get our feet on the map and that we have access to our own data centers and our own sovereignty, and that we're collaborating with the right folks, right? Internationally, right? Here in the
Yeah.
US, in Europe. I think folks are not a monolith, right? Folks have different ways of doing things, and there's plenty of people who take Africans seriously, and I'm a testament to that.
Absolutely, you are. Before we move on to the Q&A, we have just 2 more questions left for you. If you had to set 3 US-Africa space collaboration priorities for the next 5 years, what would they be?
I would focus on assets, right? Getting assets up in space for as many African countries as possible. I'd focus on looking at the way that China collaborates with Africa and actually trying to learn from that, right? I know this China word is often seen as a bad word, but look at their collaboration. It's an actual collaboration, right? It's folks are working together to solve for problems. It's private partnerships from like Chinese startups are like giving access to folks who have their algorithms put up in orbit, right? Now, like what often happens when there's fear involved is that folks refuse to learn, right? And there is a lot to take from the fact that a lot of African governments are collaborating with the Chinese, right? Like, so what is America doing that's different, that's maybe not being accepted as much as how the Chinese are looking at things. So I think that's something to learn from, right? And that's where I see things in general, right? Like I've traveled a lot, and for me, I just try to learn as much as I can, right? From how folks are responding to things. How we want people to respond to things is different from how people respond to things as well. And yeah, I think I mean, open up the data highways, right? Like let's have deep in-depth conversations about what the needs are in any given market. And one last thing I'd say then is one of the biggest problems, at least even when I was growing up, I was growing up in South Africa, and data prices were absolutely insane, right? The access to the internet, right, was scarce. I know it's improved since then, but the data prices are still out of hand because the mobile network operators can get away with anything, all right? And so finding ways to drive those data prices down, increasing access to digitization and having that be a cross collaboration, I think will go a long way in like improving and fixing US-Africa relations just in general, because in America, like data is not even, I mean, access to the internet is not even really a big part of the thought process here, right? Whereas for a lot of Africans still, right, it's a massive barrier to their own success, to their own education, to them learning different things, right? So I think improving that would be very, very useful. So that's a strategy I would look into if I was a US diplomat.
Thank you so much for that. That was very insightful. If we have any questions from the audience, please raise your hand and a mic will be given to you. Yes.
Hello, thank you very much. 2 questions for you. First, I noticed with just deal making in general between China and different countries across Africa, sometimes I feel like some of the deals aren't, I guess, fair. So how do you think about when it comes to space, maybe collective negotiation? That's the first question. Second question, you mentioned climate change and sustainability a little bit, or maybe not sustainability, but one thing that I noticed, I'm gonna give you an example in Zambia. The Chinese factory, I think I'm gonna say it's a factory. There's some sort of incidents where waste went into the water in Zambia and essentially caused, basically the water to be non-drinking, food to, basically be uneatable and a bunch of other issues. So how can the people, across Africa in particular countries be, I guess, protected from some of these, a lot of infrastructure building and, sort of the consequences of basically not doing it in a, I guess, protective manner? It's a lot.
Could I know who I'm talking to? Sorry, I can't see.
Sorry, my name is Jassam Gloucester.
Just from?
Jassam. I'm from Pittsburgh, but based here in DC.
Okay. Awesome. So the first one is about collective bargaining, right? For a less lopsided deal. I would not pretend to be an expert in terms of all the deal making. For the most part, there's things I've heard or things I've seen, right? Or bridges are being built, highways are being built, right? And I think for the typical person on a sort of a day-to-day, right? Like they're happy about that, right? Like the actual contents of the deal, I don't know. Whenever there's an opportunity for Africans to have a better deal, I will say we should go for it, right? If collective bargaining is the way forward, we should go for it. I consider myself a Pan-African, right? So for me, like I'd even prefer like Africa to be one country, right? But that's just how I see sort of a vision for the future, right? Because it's a landmass that actually could mimic a lot and learn a lot from how the US was formed, right? Because each individual US state could, if you traveled the US, right, like it could be a different country by itself, right? So it's like stepping into a different world with each state you go to, but and yet it works in unison. And I think Africa could do something similar as well. And your second question was about what again? Sorry, I forgot it.
It was about basically protecting citizens of particular countries from maybe when there's basically certain projects being developed, the people and the resources aren't always being considered. So you sort of, this is just a question from a few things that you mentioned and through the different developments, some of the people just aren't protected, and so you have waste.
Okay. Yeah, about the climate, right? Look, I definitely don't have the answer to that, right? I think that I won't pretend to have the answer to that. I just think that we need to be protective of our climate. I think Africans don't need saving, right? Africans need collaboration. Right. So if we can find ways to actually listen to folks on the ground who are experiencing these things, right? And you see an opportunity to be helpful, but B also, collaborate and maybe do good business for yourself also. No, why not take it? Right.
Sorry, to be clear, that wasn't ever, a saving Africa thing. That was a ensuring is being built in a manner to protect the citizens so that the people don't feel the consequences of, maybe developing things in a non-responsible manner. That's okay. I'm just clarifying that.
Yeah, sorry, I struggle to hear that a little bit, but I mean, developing in a responsible manner, right? Yeah, I won't pretend to have answers to that. I'll take a pass on that, but say that I think the essence of your question is very important, right?
Yes.
Hi, Rama. My name is Dr. Nola Haynes. We should be friends for a lot of reasons, first and foremost. So my question is, and I've already sent a LinkedIn request, so just FYI. So my question is around you mentioned China and you mentioned development, and a lot of my work in arms control and international security, these are obviously things that I think about. And another part of this that I think about is, what do we mean by partnership? And because we can't really think of any sort of development isn't our thing, where we do more security stuff. When you say partnership, and when you use the example of China and how they have used development as a tool of partnership, what suggestions would you have for the US and how we can deepen partnerships beyond just saying we want to? Is there like a specific project or something very specific rolling around in your mind that you wish that the US kind of got behind?
Well, yeah, I don't want to make an academic exercise of people's pain, right? But I do have some things that I've thought about a lot, right? I think like growing up, we're not the most well off, at least when I was young. But I do remember that we had a sense of pride, and I think a lot of Africans will agree with this, right? That we are proud, right? And not to say that aid has not been helpful or welcome, but I think part of it has been the infantilizing, I think, of African people has not always been helpful, right? When you take folks seriously, number one, they take themselves seriously, and number two, they take what you have to say seriously as well, right? So I think stepping away from that, that was one of the things. It was like what I've witnessed. I personally haven't done any dealings with the Chinese or done anything of that sort, but just from witnessing how specific things were taken very seriously that previously were not by Europe or by America, right? That has changed how folks look at these relations, right? And I think America can do a lot of the same, right? Like might be an unpopular opinion for some, but I think America has a lot of good in it, right? A lot of opportunity. Folks believe in you right from the get-go. I think NASA is literally one of the greatest organizations of all time, right? I love NASA, right? That I'll go on the record of saying, right? Super helpful folks who take you seriously from the get-go. And I think if America approaches things in that way, all right, in sort of the spirit of collaboration and are actually looking to work with folks because it'll actually advance both US and Africa's interests, then I personally see no problems at that point, right? I think what happens often is that there's some distrust, right? Because there's been a lot of baiting and switching. And one last thing I'll say is I have accepted your LinkedIn request.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Because, time is running out. I just wanted to thank Rama for joining us virtually. Weren't able to take more questions, unfortunately, but let's remember this. Africa must be a policy shaper in space and not just a consumer. Partnerships with the US and the diaspora are extremely, extremely critical. And that, emerging technologies, smart regulation, and opportunities these are the things that Africa needs. So we thank you, Rama, for letting us know that, we should be taking up spaces in the space sector. So I just wanted to remind the audience to continue using the hashtag #BeyondBoundaries25, hashtag Why Africa, Why Now. Please stay with us. We're going on a little coffee break. Please be back by 12. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Rama.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate you all. Thank you.